The air inside the Grand Council chamber of the Terran Dominion shimmered with the cold tang of ionized metal and fear. Beneath the high arches of black alloy and violet light, Eric Vale stood motionless, a single human framed by the luminous geometry of an alien empire. His dark gray vest was plain, almost defiant, against the silken splendor around him. Above him, on a dais of polished obsidian, sat Matriarch Vera Sol, the living emblem of the Dominion's power. Every recording Eric had seen of her had failed to convey her sheer presence. Her skin was a deep iridescent violet, traced with black bioluminescent veins that pulsed softly with each measured breath. From her temples spiraled a crown of glossy black horns, smooth and elegant, seeming less like adornment and more like the natural architecture of command. Her eyes, amber and alive, regarded him the way a star might regard a planet, distant, curious, and ready to burn. At her side lay her guardian, Kale, a creature built from nightmares and genetics. Its body was a cathedral of scaled muscle, its armor glinting like molten glass. Beneath the plates, faint veins of red light pulsed like the heartbeat of a star trying to escape its cage. When it breathed, the air shook. When it blinked, the world seemed to hesitate. "You stand before the matriarch of the Terran Dominion," intoned one of the council clerks. "Your trespass into her sanctum is a crime punishable by dissolution." Eric said nothing. His eyes were fixed not on Vera, not even on the ranks of alien dignitaries staring down at him, but on Kale, whose right hind leg trembled in the faintest, nearly invisible rhythm. Vera rose slowly from her throne, every motion deliberate, regal. Her armor flexed like liquid obsidian around her frame. "You have committed 2 offenses," she said. Her voice was deep and low, smooth as crushed velvet but threaded with threat. "First, you entered the heart of my dominion without sanction. Second," her gaze swept over his human skin, unarmored, unadorned, "you are an eyesore in my chamber. A soft thing among sharpened forms." A ripple of cold laughter circled the room from her counselors, a chorus of predatory amusement. She descended the steps toward him, each movement a dance of menace and grace. Her claws brushed Kale's head as she passed, and the beast rumbled in pleasure, or warning. "My counsel demands your death," she continued. "A slow one, for education's sake. But I am feeling generous. Perhaps I'll make an example instead. Tell me, human, why are you not afraid?" The question hung in the recycled air. Kale's eyes burned brighter, the heat of its breath washing over Eric. "Because," Eric said quietly, "your creature is in pain." The words fell like a seismic pulse. Every whisper died. Even the air scrubbers seemed to falter. Vera's golden eyes widened, the perfect stillness of her face breaking for the first time. "What did you say?" Eric's tone remained calm, clinical. "It's hiding it well, but not perfectly. The tremor in its right hind leg, chronic strain. The way it shifts weight from side to side, that's neural instability, not aggression. Its eye glow is cloudy. There's pressure in the cranial cavities. I'd guess recurring headaches, perhaps blinding." He took a slow step sideways, and Kale's head tracked him, a faint twitch in its neck. "There," Eric said softly. "Partial vision loss on the right side. Not a predator in its prime. It's suffering from progressive synaptic degradation. A gene error, maybe. You're threatening me with a weapon that's dying, matriarch. One that might turn on you before it obeys again." Silence slammed into the chamber. Vera stared at him, not furious, not insulted, but genuinely disarmed. The soft-skinned creature before her had dismantled her power symbol with nothing but observation. The insult was so profound, so alien, that her anger found no shape. Her voice, when it came, was quieter. "Take him to the enclosure," she ordered. "Give him what he needs to prove his claim." The guard seized Eric, leading him from the grand chamber into the dim tunnels of the fortress. The enclosure was vast, a transparent dome reinforced by layers of energy lattice. The walls were scarred, the ground burned black from plasma strikes. Kale had lived, and killed, here for years. From an observation deck high above, Vera watched as Eric was left alone with a single medical kit. Her second-in-command had urged her to end this experiment, but curiosity, sharp and dangerous, held her still. Below, the gate hissed open, and Kale entered with a sound like an avalanche. Eric stood perfectly still. The creature lowered itself, growling, the glow under its scales flickering with agitation. He unclasped his kit and withdrew a small sonic disc, a human pacification tool. He set it gently on the floor and sat cross-legged beside it. A shimmer rippled through the air as the emitter activated. The frequency was too low for most species to hear, but not for Kale. The beast froze, its growl breaking into a confused rumble. The subsonic pattern spoke directly to its primal hindbrain, washing through its nervous system with a rhythm that whispered safety instead of pain. For the first time in its life, Kale did not know how to respond. It circled him, massive claws scraping the floor, muscles rippling under the black armor of its scales. Eric remained unmoving, breathing slowly, his eyes half-lidded. 10 long minutes passed before the beast lowered itself, head resting on the floor. Only then did Eric move. He stood, slowly, and began to walk a wide arc around Kale, mirroring the creature's earlier motion. When he reached its flank, he crouched, extending an open hand. He waited. Kale's head rose, jaws parting, the breath inside a furnace glow. Vera gripped the rail above so tightly she could feel the alloy bending under her fingers. One wrong motion, and the human would be gone. But Eric didn't flinch. After a breathless moment, Kale lowered its head. The human's hand met hot, scaled flesh. The contact was soft, steady, certain. Vera exhaled sharply, though she hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath. Something twisted inside her chest, a flicker of envy, of awe, of something too human to name. Down below, the human spoke softly. "You're not a weapon," he said. "You're just in pain." The words were lost in the hum of containment fields, but the matriarch heard the tone. For the first time in years, the fortress felt less like a prison and more like a question. Vera's golden eyes stayed on the man below, her violet skin glowing faintly in the filtered light. The alien who ruled through fear found herself staring at a creature who wielded none at all, and realizing, uneasily, that his calm frightened her more than any weapon ever could. The next morning began in silence. The massive dome that housed Kale was washed in the soft luminescent haze of Nerosa's twin suns, their violet rays diffused by the energy shield above. Eric Vale sat near the beast's enclosure, scanning readings from a floating holoscreen. Kale lay coiled a few meters away, its eyes half-closed, every slow exhale releasing a low, rumbling vibration that resonated through the floor. Eric had barely slept. The night had been spent running diagnostics, analyzing tissue samples, and monitoring Kale's neural activity. The data confirmed what he'd already suspected: the creature's DNA was riddled with instability. Entire gene strands flickered between active and dormant states, like code written by someone who'd never cared whether the system would eventually collapse. From the observation deck above, Matriarch Vera Sol watched him with arms folded. The glow of her black-veined, violet skin was muted in the half-light, her eyes catching reflections of his movements far below. Her guards had warned her that giving a human free rein near her living weapon was foolish. Yet she found herself unable to look away. He was methodical, deliberate. Not a movement wasted. Not a single action motivated by fear. The way he worked, steady hands, unhurried patience, unnerved her. Finally, she could no longer remain a silent observer. The access doors hissed open, and she descended into the enclosure herself. Kale lifted its head immediately, a ripple of muscle tension running down its body. A warning growl thundered across the dome. Eric didn't turn. He simply said, "He doesn't like it when you enter." Vera's voice was cool. "He will tolerate my presence. He exists because I allow it." Eric kept working, adjusting a scanner over Kale's left flank. "He tolerates you, he murmured, the same way a wounded predator tolerates the cage that keeps it alive. Vera's steps were silent as she moved closer. Her scent, a strange mix of cold minerals and something faintly floral, filled the air. She stopped a mere breath behind him. The sharp points of her black crown almost touched his shoulder. "You presume much, human," she said softly. "Control is the only language worth speaking in this galaxy. Pain is its dialect. My creature is alive because of both." Eric finally looked at her. "And dying because of them." Their eyes locked. Her golden pupils narrowed to thin slits. The space between them vibrated with tension. "You talk of mercy as if it were strength," she whispered. "Do you know what mercy costs, Eric Vale? Empires. And do you know what fear costs, matriarch?" he answered. "Everything else." For a moment, she said nothing. Then, to his surprise, she dismissed her guards with a subtle gesture. They hesitated, then retreated. She remained where she was, staring at the human who had dared to contradict her in her own fortress. "You are making it docile," she said, her tone measured but carrying a strange edge. "Its worth lies in its ferocity." "Its worth lies in its life," Eric replied. "A creature in constant pain can't be loyal. Only desperate. You've mistaken desperation for obedience." Her claws flexed once, a metallic whisper slicing the air. "You would lecture me about loyalty?" "I'd remind you that loyalty can't be engineered," he said quietly. "Neither can trust." Something shifted in her gaze, something subtle, something dangerous. Vera's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile. "You speak like a philosopher. Yet you stand here in my cage, alive only because I am curious. Then maybe curiosity is the first step toward change." That earned a short, sharp laugh from her. "You think you can change me?" "No," Eric said, turning back to his scanner. "But I can show you what you've broken." He activated the projection above the console. A ghostly hologram of Kale's neural pathways shimmered into existence, glowing veins of crimson and blue. At the core, a tangled web pulsed erratically, bright flashes marking areas of decay. "This is what's killing him," Eric explained. "A protein chain that shouldn't exist. It's breaking down the neural connections faster than the body can repair them." Vera studied the image. The flicker of fascination in her eyes betrayed her disciplined calm. "Our bioengineers designed him to be durable." Eric shook his head. "They designed him to be profitable. There's a difference." Her head tilted slightly. "Profitable?" He hesitated, then said, "That's what this looks like, intentional degradation. A byproduct of some other biochemical process. Whatever it is, the damage isn't random. It's structured." Vera's eyes flickered. Enough. The single word held authority but also something else, uncertainty. Eric powered down the display. "If you want him to survive, I need access to your medical archives. All of them." "No one touches the Dominion's archives," she said automatically. "Then he dies," Eric replied simply. Her jaw tightened. For someone who commanded fleets and worlds, she suddenly looked cornered. "You're very sure of yourself for a captive." "I'm sure of my work." Silence stretched. Kale shifted, emitting a low, throaty sound that seemed to echo her indecision. Finally, Vera exhaled, a slow release that felt like surrender. "You will have limited access," she said. "And the next time you address me, you will remember who commands this world." Eric nodded once. "Understood." She turned to leave, the edges of her dark cloak brushing against his arm as she passed. The faint electric shimmer of her bioluminescent veins illuminated the air between them. "Tell me something, human," she said without turning. "Why do you care what happens to him? To any of this?" Eric paused, then answered, "Because pain is contagious. Leave it unchecked long enough, and it spreads to everyone who believes they control it. Vera didn't reply. She simply walked away, her silhouette dissolving into the violet light of the corridor. Hours later, in the observation deck, she replayed the recording from the enclosure. Each frame showed the human's quiet patience, his hand resting on Kale's scales, his eyes calm, focused, unafraid. There was no deception in his movements, no attempt to manipulate. He was, she realized, the first being she'd met who didn't flinch before her power. And instead of hating it, she found herself drawn toward it like a moth to a plasma flame. Below, Kale stirred in its sleep, the glow between its armored plates dimming into a steady, rhythmic pulse. The human's frequencies were working. The beast's agony was easing. For the first time in years, the fortress felt still. Vera leaned forward, her claws tapping softly against the railing. Her reflection on the glass stared back at her, a violet-skinned queen who had ruled by fear her entire life, now unsettled by a single human's defiance. Curious creature, she murmured, not sure whether she meant the man or herself. The fortress laboratories of the Terran Dominion were unlike anything Eric Vale had ever seen. Walls of black glass pulsed with streams of biodata, the air hummed with the heartbeat of machines that were half-living. Yet even in this cathedral of science, something was rotten. The deeper Eric dug into the Dominion's archives, the more the patterns confirmed his worst suspicion: Kale wasn't merely sick. He was being consumed. Late one night, the dome was silent except for the rhythmic exhale of the creature. Kale's light had grown fainter, his breaths shallower. Eric stood over a console, eyes scanning the shifting ribbons of genetic code. At first glance the mutation seemed random, but then he saw the repeating cycle, the same error appearing in perfect intervals. Not a flaw. A function. When the simulation finished running, Eric's stomach turned cold. The degenerative protein destroying Kale's neurons wasn't a disease. It was a byproduct. Something else inside the creature was working perfectly, an alchemical engine hidden in its blood. He drew another sample and ran a new sequence. Minutes later, the result appeared, a chemical compound of breathtaking complexity, alive and unstable. One drop could paralyze a living brain in seconds. A neurotoxin beyond any known classification. Eric whispered the truth aloud to the empty room. They built you to manufacture poison. The realization spread through him like ice. The Dominion's entire wealth, their assassins, their leverage, was born from the suffering of one living being. Kale wasn't a guardian. He was an industry. He shut down the console and paced the sterile floor, the shadows of the lab flickering across his face. He thought of Vera's calm authority, her sharp eyes when she watched him work. She hadn't seemed cruel, only pragmatic, shaped by the logic of survival. But now he knew what her survival cost. He couldn't wait until morning. The guards outside Vera Sol's private quarters straightened as the human approached, a slate of data clutched in his hand. "The matriarch is not to be disturbed," one said. "She'll want to see this," Eric answered, voice steady. From within, a low command echoed through the translucent door. "Let him in." The panel slid open. Vera stood barefoot on the dark floor, her purple skin glinting in the soft light of her chamber. Without her armor, she seemed both smaller and infinitely more dangerous, the black markings on her arms glowing faintly with every heartbeat. "This had better be worth your life," she said. "It's worth his," Eric replied, stepping forward. He placed the slate on a low table, activating the projection. Lines of genetic code and biochemical models filled the air. "The protein you believed was a defect isn't killing Kale by accident," he explained. "It's a side effect. The real process is here." He pointed to a pulsing molecular chain. "Your creature's glands produce this, an alkaloid neurotoxin. A single milligram could freeze a mind indefinitely. The Dominion's assassins, your council's leverage, it all comes from him." Vera stared, silent. "The pain you thought was weakness," Eric continued, "is what keeps the toxin flowing. The suffering keeps the glands active. He's dying because the process is too efficient. The matriarch's golden eyes dimmed. Her voice, when it came, was almost a whisper. "You're certain?" Eric nodded. "Completely." She sank slowly into her seat, the folds of her dark robe pooling like spilled ink around her feet. "I didn't create this," she said, her tone stripped of authority. "It was my predecessor's design. When he fell, I inherited his empire, and the monster that powered it. The Council expects results. The assassins need their supply. If I end it, they'll turn on you," Eric finished. "Yes." The single syllable hung like a verdict. "My throne, my life, gone. The Dominion devours weakness." She looked up at him, and for the first time, there was no fire in her eyes, only a quiet, desperate weariness. "Do you think I enjoy watching him suffer?" "No," Eric said softly. "I think you've forgotten what it feels like not to." Her gaze lingered on him, uncertain. "You speak as though you can fix it." "Maybe I can," he answered. "If I can isolate the degenerative enzyme, I might be able to synthesize a counteragent. It would neutralize the damage without disrupting the toxin completely. A balance. A miracle," she said bitterly. "A solution," he corrected. "But I'll need access to a real lab. And your trust." The corner of her mouth twitched, something between amusement and disbelief. "Trust is a currency I do not trade, Eric Vale. Then consider it an investment." For a long moment, neither spoke. The distant hum of the fortress filled the silence between them. Then Vera rose and moved to a console on the wall. With a swipe of her clawed hand, a hidden door opened, revealing a downward passage bathed in blue light. "My private laboratory," she said. "No one has entered it in 10 years. Until now." The chamber below was breathtaking, a sanctum of technology that bridged science and art. Tubes of bioluminescent fluid ran through the walls like veins. Floating platforms held instruments that adjusted themselves in midair. It was the Dominion's true heart, and Vera had given it to him. Eric began work immediately. Days blurred into nights. He moved between microscanners and holographic gene maps, his focus absolute. Vera often joined him, silent at first, watching how his large, rough hands handled instruments designed for precision smaller than a hair's width. There was grace in his movements, a patient kind of confidence that she found both alien and magnetic. Sometimes she brought him food herself, though she never explained why. They would eat in near silence, the hum of machines filling the space where words failed. Between sessions, he spoke of his past, his years as a xenobiologist on frontier worlds, his exile after refusing to weaponize a species he'd studied. Vera listened more than she spoke, learning a kind of honesty she had never encountered. Slowly, the boundaries between captor and captive began to blur. One evening, as Eric adjusted a volatile enzyme within the containment field, the catalyst unit flashed a warning. The vial inside began to overheat, glowing orange. Before he could reach for it, Vera moved, swift, fluid, precise. Her long fingers flew over the control panel, flooding the system with coolant. The light dimmed instantly. Her hand rested on his as the temperature stabilized. Their eyes met through the haze of vapor. Neither spoke. The contact lingered longer than logic allowed. The silence broke only when Eric murmured, "Thank you." Vera's voice was low. "Do not thank me for instinct." But her hand didn't pull away. The machines hummed on, and the glow from the containment field painted them both in ghostly light. For a long moment, the queen of an empire and the exiled scientist simply stood together, connected by the fragile thing they were building, something that might heal a monster or destroy them both. By the 8th day, Eric held a small vial up to the light. The liquid inside shimmered like molten silver. "It's stable," he whispered. "The counteragent works." Vera stepped closer, her expression unreadable. The faint light from the vial reflected in her golden eyes. For the first time, she smiled, small, genuine, and devastating. But before either could speak, the alarm klaxons erupted. Red emergency lights flooded the lab. Across the wall displays, warning symbols flared. A voice crackled through the comms. Matriarch. Outer defenses breached. Multiple hostiles inbound. Vera's expression hardened, the smile vanishing as the warrior returned. Threx, she hissed. He's come for us. Eric sealed the vial in a stasis vault. What do we do? Vera turned to him, her horns catching the red light like blades. We fight. The corridors of the Varan fortress burned with red light and the stench of ozone. Explosions shook the floors beneath Eric Vale's boots as he followed Vera's soul through the smoke-filled hallways. She moved like a living shadow, armor snapping into place piece by piece, her violet skin gleaming with black fractal patterns that seemed to pulse with fury. Stay in the lower levels, she ordered, snapping a combat mask over her face. You're more valuable alive than dead. Eric grabbed a plasma cutter from the wall. I'm not hiding while you fight your own war. Vera's eyes flashed with something between annoyance and respect. You argue like a soldier. Only when I care who wins. The air trembled with another impact. The fortress shields were failing. On the upper decks, the Zorn invaders poured in, mercenaries led by Threx Vorner, the reptilian warlord who had coveted Vera's throne for years. His ships now blotted out the suns above the fortress dome, raining fire into the city below. Together, Eric and Vera sprinted through the collapsing corridors. When the first squad of Threx's warriors appeared, hulking scaled brutes wielding plasma rifles, Vera didn't hesitate. Her blades ignited with crackling violet light, slicing through armor like silk. Eric moved beside her, swinging his improvised weapon with surprising strength. For a human, he fought with terrifying focus. Every motion was efficient, driven by purpose. He didn't kill for dominance, but for necessity. They reached the command nexus, a circular chamber below the ruined throne room. The holographic map of the fortress glowed crimson, enemy signatures everywhere. Threx has breached the inner sanctum, Vera said, scanning the readouts. We're outnumbered 5-1. The comm crackled. Matriarch. It was Voran, her last surviving commander. They've overrun the gates. We can't hold, his voice cut out in static and an explosion. Vera stared at the dead transmission, her jaw set. The walls shook again, dust falling like ash. Eric stepped closer. There's still a way. Kale. Her eyes snapped to him. No. He's unstable. The counteragent hasn't been tested. He's our only chance, Eric insisted. If you release him now, he'll either save us or die trying. But if you don't, we all die here. Vera's claws dug into the console. She looked at him, and for a brief moment, the iron mask cracked. Behind the golden eyes, there was raw fear, not for herself, but for what she might lose. His mind may break, she whispered. Eric shook his head. Trust me. He'll hear me. The command hub's blast door groaned as the Zorn began cutting through with thermal saws. The screech of melting metal filled the air. Vera removed a black amulet from around her neck, a control device linked directly to Kale's neural implants. It glimmered faintly, the Dominion's crest etched into its surface. She pressed it into Eric's palm. Then you use him, she said, voice fierce but trembling. His life, and mine, are in your hands. The door buckled inward. Eric didn't hesitate. He ran. The enclosure dome loomed before him, bathed in crimson light from the alarms. Inside, Kale paced restlessly, eyes flaring with panic. The sonic emitters hummed weakly, trying and failing to calm the creature. Eric entered the control chamber and deactivated the barrier. The massive gate split open with a hiss. The heat from Kale's body washed over him like the breath of a forge. It's all right, he said, voice calm despite the chaos outside. I'm here. Kale's growl vibrated the floor, but it wasn't rage, it was confusion. They're coming to hurt her, Eric continued softly. Vera. We have to protect her. He didn't use the amulet. Instead, he reached out with the same steady voice, the same rhythm he'd used that first day. The beast froze, nostrils flaring. Recognition sparked in its ember-like eyes. Outside, the fortress walls gave way with a roar. Zorn soldiers surged through the corridors, only to stop dead as the dome gate fully opened. Kale stepped into the hallway, its black scales rippling with molten light. For a heartbeat, the soldiers hesitated. Then their leader shouted, "Fire!" Blinding plasma bolts tore through the air, but Kale was already moving. The creature slammed into them with a roar that rattled the foundation. Energy shields flared and shattered. Eric followed behind, his plasma cutter slicing through armor joints and weapon casings. Then Vera appeared, her armor scorched, her twin blades alive with violet fire. She moved beside them, her strikes perfectly synchronized with Kale's rhythm and Eric's momentum. Together they became a single organism of survival, the beast's power, the human's precision, the matriarch's fury. For every Zorn soldier they faced, 3 more fell. The fortress shook under the storm of their counterattack. But victory came at a cost. An explosion from a plasma grenade threw Eric off his feet. He hit the wall hard, dazed, the plasma cutter tumbling away. A towering Zorn warrior loomed over him, weapon raised. Before he could strike, a blur of violet and steel flashed past. Vera's blade cut through the invader's throat. She turned just in time for Eric to pull her down, shielding her from a collapsing ceiling panel. The impact left them tangled together on the ground, breathing hard. Their eyes met through the haze. For a second, the war fell away. "Still think I should have stayed in the lab," he said, half smiling. Her lips curved faintly. "Remind me to punish you later." He laughed once, a dry sound amid the chaos. Then they rose together. Minutes, or hours, later, the last echo of battle faded. Smoke drifted through the cracked corridors. The fortress stood broken but alive. In the ruined throne room, Vera stood amid the debris, her armor scorched and dented. The great obsidian dais lay split in half. Kale rested nearby, his massive head lowered, breathing heavily but alive. The red glow under his scales had steadied into a calm, healthy rhythm. Eric approached, resting a hand against the creature's neck. "You did it," he murmured. Kale's eye flicked open, regarding him with quiet awareness. Then it rumbled low in its chest, a sound that was almost contentment. Vera turned toward them. She looked different now. The aura of command that had once filled every motion was still there, but softer, tempered by something deeper. Gratitude. "The contract for your service is fulfilled," she said quietly. "You are free, Eric Vale. I'll grant you a ship and any resources you require." He didn't answer immediately. He just looked at her, the violet skin streaked with soot, the glowing black patterns along her arms, the faint tremor of exhaustion in her hands. "Is that what you want?" he asked. Her breath caught. She reached out, fingers brushing his cheek. The sharp claws that had once symbolized death now traced a line of quiet reverence. "No," she whispered. "I'm offering you a new contract. Not of servitude, of partnership." The air between them thickened with the weight of unspoken promises. He lifted her hand, pressed it gently against his face, and leaned forward. The kiss that followed was not of conquest, but of completion, a seal forged in fire and survival. Kale rumbled softly beside them, eyes half-lidded, like a guardian keeping watch over a new and fragile peace. 6 months later, the Grand Council chamber had been rebuilt, not as a throne room, but as a command center. The cold blues of intimidation were replaced by warm gold light. The shattered dais now gleamed with a frame of burnished steel, a symbol of renewal. Vera's soul, no longer armored in obsidian, wore a tailored crimson tunic that balanced elegance with practicality. Eric stood beside her, a dark jacket bearing the insignia of their new alliance, a stylized image of Kale coiled around a healing rod. At their feet, Kale lay coiled, peaceful and strong, the glow beneath his scales steady and alive. The Dominion's future was no longer built on pain. Delegates came not with fear, but with purpose, scientists and envoys negotiating the distribution of Varan serum, a medical compound born from Kale's former toxin. Vera listened to reports, her sharp mind turning profit into progress. Eric smiled quietly, watching her transform an empire once ruled by terror into one built on cooperation. When the chamber finally emptied, she turned to him. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. "Destroying what was?" He took her hand, thumb tracing the black lines along her skin. "You didn't destroy it," he said. "You saved it. You saved yourself." Her golden eyes glowed softly. "And you taught me how." They stood together, staring out at the stars through the high windows, two beings who had rebuilt not just a world, but each other. In the distance, Kale lifted its head, letting out a low, resonant call that echoed through the chamber like a vow. It was the sound of peace being born from ruin. And so ends the story of Eric, Vera, and Kale, the healer, the matriarch, and the monster who became more than a weapon. Their story isn't just about survival or power, it's about choosing to heal instead of dominate, to build instead of destroy. Somewhere in the galaxy, there's still a fortress with violet light running through its walls, and in its center, a creature breathes quietly, watched over by two souls who learned that empathy can rewrite destiny. If you enjoyed this story, if it made you feel even a spark of wonder or hope, then stay with us. The cosmos is full of strange worlds, broken empires, and fragile hearts waiting to be mended. Subscribe to the channel for more sci-fi tales like this one, stories of courage, curiosity, and connection across the stars. Like this video if you believe compassion can be the most powerful weapon in any universe. Share it with someone who loves deep, cinematic storytelling about humanity in the far reaches of space. Until next time, traveler, keep your eyes on the stars, and remember, sometimes the bravest thing you can do in a galaxy of monsters is refuse to be afraid.